So over the last several years, I've been making videos explaining every single death in Squid Game. And in today's video, I've compiled all of those videos into this one video, with every death from the very first death that we ever saw to the final death that we saw in Final Season, Season 3. So with that said, and without wasting any more time, let's just jump right into it, with the first death that we ever saw in the series, coming from player 324, in arguably the most popular Squid Game event of all time, the red light green light game. Player 324 made a bet with player 250 to be the first to make it to the other side. But by rushing and slightly stumbling, he of course moved, which of course resulted in his death. Now player 250 wouldn't be far behind him. After he saw that 324 fell, he went over to gloat just a little bit. But then out of shock by his death, he ran for his life and was shot as a result, before he ever even had a chance of getting away. Now after being covered in player 250's blood, 306 began to scream and was shot as a result. This then of course made everyone else panic and run around desperately trying to get away. Now in this moment, a chunk of players were subsequently killed during the panic, but due to the mass hysteria and quick camera switches, many of these numbers are impossible to find out. So if I was actually able to grab any of them, you will see them on screen right here. But now following the panic, the game continues, with player 078 being the next to mess up and die, alongside a number that I just really can't make out as of right now. But then right after that, with sheer precision, player 305 was shot in the head as yet another result of him moving during the red light. With the same thing then sadly happening to players 362, 153, 056, 077, 126, 400 flat, 220, 114, 046, 112, 163, 041, and 289. But right then, as our MC gi-hun is about to fall and likely join the others in death, he is saved by my all-time favourite Squid Game character, Abdul Ali, or player 199. But then as they make it across the line and the timer finally ends, we of course see that several of the remaining players never made it across the line, which of course now meant that they would all be shot dead as a result of their failure. Now following this, we later see that one of the shot contestants actually managed to live, but the guards then nail his box shot and likely just sent it into the incinerator like the others. We are then later told by the guards that 245 players were subsequently killed during the red light green light game. They then allowed the remaining contestants to vote if they wanted to leave the game show, but inevitably even after being allowed to leave, a number of them actually returned later on. But during their time away, Jang Duk-soo, or player 101, stabbed and killed a former gangmate of his when that gang member arranged to have him jumped by a rival gang looking to collect on some sort of debt. Much later, however, as the guards are bringing the contestants back to the island, the police officer Hwang Jun-ho choked out guard 029 and threw him overboard into the ocean, where he of course subsequently drowned to death. Now it is then revealed that of the 201 that lived through the first game, only 187 actually returned to the island. That's around 93% of the total 201. Now much later, the remaining contestants of course went to the next game, which is arguably one of the hardest games of all time. It's the cookie game. Now this game of course needs no explanation, as I'm sure you've probably seen it somewhere online once before. But during the game we of course get to witness a total of 108 players die as a result of failing to solve the cookie. Of the 108, the players that we actually get to see die are players 369, 209, 061, 413, 182, 123, 338, and 058. We then of course move over and see that 215, 068, 446, 079, and 237 are all shot and killed as a result of failing their cookie as well. But we of course then witness that once the time runs out, all the remaining players were slaughtered like animals. But then sadly, just shortly after the square guard finally revealed his face, No Sang-hun, or player 119, shot himself in the head, as a realization that he was about to die no matter what. The unnamed male guard was then shot in the head by Hwang Jun-ho, aka the frontman, aka the man in the black mask. He was shot because of course he broke the rules of removing his mask in front of the other guards, something which is of course punishable by death. Now with that, it was later announced that a total of 79 players were eliminated from the cookie game, which of course now brings the remaining number of players in the running all the way down to a shocking 108. But shortly after returning, Jang Duk-soo, or player 101, beat player 271 to death over an egg. So now of course we only have 107 players remaining. But then as the lights go out, we of course witness as the strong murders the weak, with around 27 players in total being killed off during the nightly raids. During the raids, however, we actually get to see several of these murders actually take place. The numbers seen again are as follows: 198, killed for ratting on 101. 331, who after trying to aid Se-byuk from being killed by 101, was then himself killed by 101 with multiple stabbings to the chest. 328 was then seen strangled to death by 224 using his own bedding. 074 was then beaten to death when she was screaming for help by the front door, and 103 was seen dead after the soldiers entered the room, along with 361 and 444. But then players 277, 074, 198, 087, 222, 301, 416, 006, 206, 233, and 239 were all reported dead over the intercom. So with that said, that's a total of 27 players who were eliminated just last night. We now have 80 players in total going into the next game of death, which is of course called Tug of War. In this game there are 8 teams of 10, which then must compete against one another to survive. The losing team of course dies, just like every other game prior to this, and the winning team of course just moves on to the next game. So of course going into this game it's expected that half the remaining contestants will die, but which ones of course were they? Well, in the first game we of course witnessed Team 1's team knock out Team 7's, which of course consisted of players 241, 327, 243, 027, 273, 058, 408, 037, 120, and 245. Now after that game finished, the second game would begin, with Team 4 going up against Team 5. Team 4 of course being our MC's team, which of course means Team 5's team, which consisted of players 314, 447, 396, 184, 315, 019, 194, 063, 019, and 156, all were killed as a result of losing. We then learned later that 20 members from 2 unknown teams were also killed off during the last game, which of course, like we said before, now leaves 20 players left. Now while sleep deprived and on lookout, we then see that gi-hun, or player 456, has a flashback where we of course witness another person dying due to getting their head caved in during some sort of minor strike. Which of course is a minor moment, but it's a death that we've seen in season 1, so of course it has to be included in this video. Now next we of course see that an unnamed guard gets stabbed to death by gi, or player 111, when he refuses to tell him exactly what the next game would be. We then see another unnamed guard get killed by the man in the black mask for once again removing his mask and for subsequently helping player 11 have an advantage in the games. We then see that the police officer also shot guard 028 in the head to maintain his cover as one of the other guards. gi, or player 11, was then subsequently killed by an unnamed guard as a result of him killing the guard from earlier and for simply knowing too much about the games themselves ahead of time. Now the number of players remaining is of course 19, going into what of course will become one of the most heartbreaking games of all time, the marbles game. Now in this game you're forced to compete against your closest friend to claim all the marbles, but the one with no marbles left at the end of the game of course dies. Now of course the first number that we of course see lose everything and die is number 414, but he of course was followed shortly after by 002. We then see number 040 get shot in the head, before off in the distance we hear that both 068 and 229 have also died as a result of losing their games. We then see that after losing to 101, player 278 also dies, with player 043 being the next reported death, followed shortly after by 085, 276, 158, and 070. All of course were reported over the intercom. It's right then that we also get to see one of the saddest deaths of all time, the death of my favourite character Abdul Ali, or player 199, who of course died after being conned by someone he considered a dear friend, Cho Sang-woo. That's not all, it's just seconds later we of course get to see the beautiful and amazing Ji-young, or player 240, getting shot in the head as a result of giving Se-byuk the win in the game of marbles. We then hear that player 001 has also been killed off as a result of losing to 456. But if you've of course seen the show before, then you know that isn't exactly how that whole situation actually went down. But now that of course marks the end of the marbles game. Now moving on, the next death that we of course see actually comes from player 069 himself, when he of course killed himself after beating and subsequently killing his wife in the previous game. The next game of death is another incredibly popular one. It's the glass bridge. Each player must now jump onto a piece of glass and see if it's the false one or not. If it isn't sturdy, they fall, and of course die. The first to fail and of course die in this game is of course 096, who actually decided to go first in this game of guessing. Next of course was 308, who went second. After her it was 062, then 021, and then 453, followed shortly by 151, who was actually thrown off of his platform by 244, who was also then thrown off of his platform by 407. 407 then decided to actually guess himself, but actually guessed wrong and of course fell to his death. Now after 101 actually refused to move, Jungmin-tae, or player 322, was pushed from behind by player 212. Now in a shocking turn of events, player 212 actually killed herself while holding onto player 101, living up to the promise they actually made about sticking together right to the very end. We then see player 017 get pushed from behind by Cho Sang-woo, which of course also marked the last death in the glass bridge game. Now moving on, there's a total of just 3 players remaining in the Squid game. Sometime later, however, we get another heartbreaking death from Se-byuk, who of course was stabbed to death by Cho Sang-woo off camera. now bringing that total of 3 players down to just the remaining 2, Cho Sang-woo and Sung Gi-hun. But now of course, before we get to the 3 remaining deaths in the series, I'd first like to ask you all to consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. It helps us out a lot and I'd very much appreciate it. But now with that said, let's of course cover the final death in the Squid Game, the death of Cho Sang-woo. Now Cho Sang-woo in the end of course decided to kill himself, rather than forfeit the prize money and leave with gi-hun. The reason for this was mostly selfish. He knew that leaving wasn't much of an option for him, because on the outside he of course has no remaining money to pay off his debts. He would just likely end up in jail or killed off by one of the many people he actually owes a lot of money to. And he of course knew that because of the kind of person that gi-hun actually is, he would take that prize money and of course use it to help Sang-woo's mother out, which is actually exactly what he did towards the end of the show. So yes, while his decision to kill himself was of course a selfish one, it was also honestly the only option he really had left to do. But now with that of course concludes the Squid Game. But sadly there are still 2 more deaths left for us to talk about, with the first of course being the death of gi-hun's mother, who died shortly after he went back into the game, due to the complications around her diabetes illness. But then of course the second death actually came much later in that same episode from player 001, who we of course just found out was actually the host of the entire event. He died after meeting with gi-hun due to his cancer, a meeting where he of course explained why the event even happened and why he was actually involved in it. It wasn't anything truly redeemable for his character, but something that really did shock me in that moment when I first saw it for the very first time. The first death that of course happened in this second season, coming from the legend that will always be Mr. Kim. Now Mr. Kim is of course the loan shark who helped gi-hun track down the salesman. He died when both he and Woo-suk were captured and forced into a Russian roulette version of rock paper scissors, otherwise known as rock paper scissors -1, which is essentially a version of rock paper scissors that uses 2 hands. Now the heartbreaking moment in this game actually came when Woo-suk pulled 2 rocks, and Mr. Kim of course pulled a paper and a scissors. All Mr. Kim of course had to do in this moment to win would be simply pull away his hand that had scissors, which of course would leave paper, which we all know beats rock. But when it of course came time for him to do this, Mr. Kim refused to pull away either hand, disqualifying himself from the game and of course saving his friend, but also subsequently killing himself. Now I think it's fair to say that this is the saddest and most beautiful death of all the Squid Game, as it actually had me on the brink of fucking tears and I barely even knew either of the characters at this point in time. But now of course we move on to the next death of the show, which of course was actually the salesman himself, in the same exact episode in fact. He dies, or more specifically kills himself, after a Russian roulette game against gi-hun, where after going back and forth for quite some time, it ultimately came down to that 6th and final bullet. Now in this moment, he clearly contemplated turning the gun on gi-hun and simply killing him. But after a good push and a punch to the ego by gi-hun, he of course followed through and completed the game by turning the gun on himself, of course taking his own life and marking the end of that episode. Now the next death we see doesn't actually come until the 3rd episode of the series, when we of course see the contestants playing the red light green light game. The first death in this game came from the beyond beautiful player 196, who of course died as a result of her moving due to the bee that landed on her neck. This of course then led player 283 into a panic, which of course also resulted in her getting shot. This then was followed by 455, 371 and 115, before the mass panic of hundreds of contestants of course led to the deaths of many more. The ones seen during the mass panic are 406, 292, 338, 262, 250, 020, 217 and 066. Next we of course see a terrified young woman who is also known as player 188, shaking her way all the way towards the afterlife, which of course was followed by player 244. Now everything after this seemed perfect and gi-hun's plan was actually working incredibly well, until Thanos, or player 230, decided to push and subsequently kill players 216, 270 and 257, before he then continued to dance like a nutjob all the way towards the end. The next deaths then seen in this game were actually followed shortly after this, by players 355, 293, 237 and 229. But then as the rest of the players started to make it across the line and survive, players 165, 384 and 444 were shot for having failed to do the same. Except as far as 444 was concerned, he was actually shot in the leg before then getting shot in the head later on by guard number 11 to confirm the kill. But now she didn't just confirm the kill in that moment, she also confirmed the end of that game. Some time then passes before the next death, which of course came in the next team-based game known as the 6-leg pentathlon. In this game, the very first 2 teams to play it are actually the first 2 teams to die, with Team 1 of course consisting of players 286, 045, 254, 395 and 341, And Team 2 of course consisting of 016, 198, 189, 416 and 178. We then see that as the game continues and the montage plays, that many teams achieve victory in this game. But alternatively, during that same montage, we actually see that many of the teams do not achieve victory and many of them are shot dead, with players 382, 273, 429, 014, 148, 004, 167, 437, 412, 206, 178, 212, 330, 032, 046, 234, and 357, all dying as a result of losing the game. We then see the two final teams begin to play the game for themselves, with 001's and 456's team of course winning. But sadly, as they're cheering, the other team is of course shot dead. That team of course consisting of players 135, 239, 263, 415, and 453. We then take a minor break from all the chaos and death to see just how much was made and how many were actually killed in that last game, with it being revealed that currently there are just 255 players remaining in the game, also meaning that a total of 110 players were killed in the previous game of death. We then of course move on to the next game of death, which is called Mingle. Here a number gets called out and you must gather in a group of that size and go to the rooms. If you do not gather in the correct size or you are left outside the room when the timer ends, you are of course killed. Now as the first round begins, it also ends quite quickly, with a number of players losing right off the rip. Many of these numbers are impossible to see in this moment, with the only exception being 043, who of course was last seen alive but was likely harvested and killed later on during the organ exchange. We then see that as the games continue and round 2 begins, the next number being called out is of course number 4. But as everyone enters their rooms, we of course see that players 256, 316, 313, 050 and 238 were all killed for either losing the game or simply breaking its rules. The next number that's called is of course 3, and as everyone runs to their doors once again, we of course see that players 034, 038, 104, 109, 291, 309, 335, 345, 347, 365, and 368 were all either seen shot and killed or just reported over the intercom. In the next round, the number called out was 6, and once again everyone rushes to their respective doors, only this time when they were running, Young Mi or player 095 gets bumped and knocked over, which eventually leads her to running out of time and sadly dying. A death that of course not only hurt Yeonju in that moment but also me. Like, Young Mi was about as adorable a character as you could possibly get. Why the hell did she have to fucking die in this moment? Why couldn't it be that fucking shaman bitch? Ain't nobody liking her. But now aside from Young Mi dying in that round, no other players were seen or reported dead at the end of the round. Which of course now brings us on to the final round of this game, with the number called out being number 2. Now in this round we of course see player 001 break the neck of player 343, which wasn't just a badass moment but was also the only confirmed kill in that round. Now with that we of course reach the end of the Mingle game, with a reported 100 players remaining going into the next vote. Also meaning a total of 155 players were actually killed during that last game of death. We then get a brief moment with the detective where we see a member of his team die due to an explosion while looking for the island. We of course then return to the vote, which has ended in a tie, which understandably annoys a lot of people. So much so that both teams begin to fight in the men's room, with 5 players in total dying, 2 from the X's side and 3 from the O's. The numbers seen were as follows: player 230 aka Thanos, and player 331 aka that random fuck. And of course, who could also forget 268, 299 and 401. Again, more random people. But now this of course all meant that the X's now had the advantage going into the vote that would happen tomorrow. Which also of course meant that as the lights would go out, the O's would be out for blood. But before that, we actually see another of the detective's men die on the outside of the games. This guy is of course stabbed and thrown overboard by that lying captain, who actually appears to be secretly working for the front man. Something that only once you actually learn about it seems incredibly fucking obvious. But now as the nightly attacks begin, we of course see a number of the contestants get killed, with the ones of course seen being 185, 182, 102, 406, and sadly the beautiful Say Me or number 380, with 380 having been killed by junkie bastard number 124. Now once the guards burst in and clear the room, we of course see Gi-hun and his team grab and kill many of them. But as they don't exactly wear their numbers on their chest, it's hard to know exactly how many of them were died or who exactly died in this moment. So let's just say it was quite a few guards who died in this moment and moved the hell on. Next we see that as Gi-hun's team is pushing forward, Hyunju absolutely slays out and kills 3 more while moving to the control room, with the young guard that was leading the way following shortly after. We then see player 072 get shot from across the hall, before we then see a couple of more guards die due to the returning fire. We then see Jungbei kill one of the guards on his way to the control room, before we then switch back to the crossfire where we see another guard die and fall 100 feet to the floor. Player 206 is then the next to go, before shortly after he is avenged by some of the other players when they kill 2 more guards. Gi-hun then takes another of the guards with him before he runs out of ammo. Some time then passes and we see Gi-hun actually find and kill another of the guards, before 001 finally reveals his true colours and shoots 2 more players in the back, players 047 and 015. He then pretends to die over the mic to Gi-hun, so I guess you could say 001 is also believed to be dead by Gi-hun and the others. 324 is seen taking out another guard before then turning the gun on himself and killing himself. We then see that as the rest surrender, both 145 and 246 are shot and killed, but it's also widely believed that 246 is in fact still alive and was in fact only shot by guard number 11, who of course is the guard that's seen to have a soft spot for his kid. We then see the man in the black mask appear, and take out his gun, which he of course uses to shoot Jungbei, of course as punishment to Gi-hun for his attempt at escape. Of course yet another sad death, but also the final death of the season. Okay, so like we've done with the previous 2 seasons, we're here to explain every single death that we saw in the final season of Squid Game. And just like the previous 2 parts, there was actually a hell of a lot of them. Like I'm talking well over 100 confirmed deaths seen in just these 6 episodes alone. So with that being said, and without wasting any more time, let's just jump right into the first confirmed and seen death in this season. And that's the confirmation of the drone pilot's death from season 2. Now of course that's a death that we did cover in this season 2 video, but it's one that wasn't actually fully confirmed until now. But now moving on, the next set of deaths that we see actually come from guard number 11 when she shoots and kills 3 other random guards that were selling organs on the black market. She then goes on to kill the surgeon as well in the beginning of the next episode. Now we then move over to the first death game of season 3, Hide and Seek, where we hear multiple people dying all around us, with the first player being mentioned being player 310. We then see players 333 and 124 stab player 235. This of course accounted for half of a kill for both of them. We then hear over the intercom that player 105 has also been stabbed and killed off. And then later, in order to protect her friends and the unborn baby, Hyun-ju fights and kills player 226, deciding she's actually better suited for the role of predator rather than prey. We then see player 232 get locked in a room by player 100, where he's then of course stabbed to death by player 349. We then go back to players 333 and 124 getting another elimination on player 411, which of course now meant that they have both completed their challenge. They then go and search for the baby mama of 333, and along the way we actually see player 400 getting stabbed by random player 276. Gi-hun then finds random player 197 dead on the ground, before walking past player 336 stabbing player 394. We then see player 388, Dae-ho, accidentally kill player 395 by kicking him down the stairs, where he of course cracked his head and died. We then move over to player 007, who is currently getting his ass kicked by player 172. At least that was until player 203 came along and saved him by gutting player 172 like he was a pig, passing the test and breaking his glasses along the way. Now we then move over to the shaman bitch, who leads her retarded followers right into the afterlife, when she of course leads them to a room that was housing 2 red killers inside. In this moment we see both 006 and 447 getting stabbed and killed by 333 and 124. The shaman then later witnesses another death of player 440, before player 007 finds the body of 009. Player 100 then finds and uses the blood of player 418 to avoid suffering the same fate. We then see the body of player 024, who had been killed sometime before. But now after that we get one of the best fights and deaths in the entire season, and that's the fight and death of player 202, who of course had just been killed after his insane fight against the incredible Hyun-ju. Now this fight and this moment was so incredible that even player 039, who was running low on time and needed to get a kill, decided that it was actually better to piss off and find someone else than to actually stand his ground and fight Hyun-ju. Like, how scary do you have to be as a person that someone else chooses death rather than throwing hands with you? Like, the aura that Hyun-ju was letting off right then was incredible. At least that was, in my opinion. But now sadly, this incredible hype didn't last long, as right when Hyun-ju found freedom, she decided to go back and help the others, which of course resulted in her death at the hands of none other than player 333, marking potentially the saddest death in the entire Squid Game series. Now a little after this, we actually hear over the intercom that player 353 has just been killed by player 350. We then finally get the death of the annoying shaman bitch, when she of course was stabbed by the high off his tits player 125, who during his mental breakdown actually hears that player 380 has also died at that same moment. We then see that after about an hour of searching, Gi-hun is finally tracked down and strangled the life out of Dae-ho. This was of course due to him being a massive factor in the failed rebellion that happened just a couple of days earlier. But now continuing with this roller coaster of emotions that Season 3 seems to be bringing, we actually get the final death of Episode 2, which of course is Player 007, when he attempted to kill Baby Mama 222. However, before he actually could do this, he was stabbed in the back by his own mother, which while didn't straight up result in her killing him, did result in him failing the test and being killed off by the guards shortly after. Now at the beginning of the next episode, we see that as the guards are cleaning up, one player managed to survive while hiding. But as he attacks what is eventually revealed to be one of the VIPs, he gets shot in the back by this insanely hot Chinese VIP, marking the first death that we see in episode 3. But don't worry, because there's a hell of a lot more. It's then announced that a total of 35 players had died in the last game, and the number of the currently remaining players is only 25 now. But then as we begin the very next morning, we witness the death of the kind old lady, number 149. She of course did this after the death of her son and after convincing Gi-hun to watch over the baby and its mother. But now the next death that we actually see in this season isn't even human. It's actually the dog that attacked Woo-suk, which of course subsequently led to Woo-suk pulling his gun and shooting it in the head. Now we then move back over to the next game, which is an extreme version of Jump Rope, where the first to start the game and die is none other than player 124, who risked life and limb just to get a taste of his sweet candy. We then see that after player 097 actually made it across, he turned and started pushing players off, starting with player 312 before doing the same with player 276. Player 209 then falls after losing balance on the platform, but they are followed shortly after by player 163 who did the same exact thing. Now we then see player 192 then grab and pull player 442 off the platform as he falls to his death, which forced players 349 and 377 to turn back. However, as he did so, player 377 actually trips and falls. But he wouldn't be alone in this, as player 349 was then kicked from the platform by player 203. We then see that players 445, 448 and 260 followed them shortly after in much the same way. Gi-hun then gets attacked by player 096, but after a bit of struggling, 096 ends up getting kicked off the platform and sent into the great beyond. Shortly after this, player 306 then trips and manages to hold on, but with no one around that is willing to help, he soon falls and of course also dies. But then after all this, we get another incredibly sad death. It's the death of player 222. Who decided that it was actually better for her to sacrifice herself so that her baby had a chance of surviving with player 456. Which in the end actually did turn out to be an incredibly smart decision on her part, but it was also an unbelievably sad death and one that almost had me on the edge of tears. Now we then move away from the games for just a moment and witness as the captain of the ship slaughters every member that is on board, except of course for the detective and the head mercenary, who of course also went on to then kill the captain later on. Now in the beginning of episode 5, we actually get a flashback of the frontman's time in the games, where we see that he killed not only one of his rivals, but also every last one of them that remained in the game, becoming the only survivor and winner of that year. We then see the next death come at the hands of the female guard from earlier, when she of course shot and killed the head officer in the frontman's office. But we then move back over to the games where we see that player 125, the junkie, go off his tits and pretty much willingly allow everyone to push him off the platform, of course amounting to his death. We then get a shootout back on the ocean, where player 246 manages to actually hit and kill one of the guards that is chasing him, before the detective shows up and actually clears out the rest of them, marking 3 more deaths to be added to this ever-growing total. Now after a lot of struggling between players 456 and 336, we see player 333 push and kill player 336, saving Gi-hun and the baby in the process. We then see that as Gi-hun stands up for the lunchbox, he and 333 are forced into a fight against players 203 and 353. A fight they of course win when player 333 kicks player 353 from the platform and Gi-hun of course stabs player 203 in the chest. But as things were actually looking up, player 333 gets greedy and kills player 100, of course just to get his share of the money. At that point, player 039 decides that he'd rather die than be a lunchbox for these guys to use, so he of course throws himself from the platform and dies. We then see Gi-hun and player 333 fight to the death, with both of them eventually falling from the platform only to grab on at the very last minute. However, eventually player 333 actually loses grip and falls to his death, which leaves just Sung Gi-hun and the baby. Which of course also led to a death that we all saw coming, but one that we weren't nearly ready for in the end. It's the death of Sung Gi-hun, player 456, who of course decided to kill himself in the end rather than the baby, proving to himself, the frontman and even the VIPs that not all humans are greedy, selfish bastards that'll kill a newborn baby just for some cash, even if it is well over $1 million worth. It's just not worth your soul to do something that evil. But now that does mark the final death in Season 3 of Squid Game. I do hope you enjoyed this video even just a little bit, and consider subscribing for a bit more. But for now, that's going to do it for me and this one. Again, I hope you have a great day or night wherever you are, and peace.